It's a pleasure to be here in front of this congregation again. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak before you. When they asked me to speak here on 4th of July weekend, I thought, the 4th of July, we commemorate this event every year with fireworks and parades and all this fun time things we do. But when it comes down to it, this is a holiday that commemorates warfare. This is the 4th of July, the signing of the Declaration of Independence was the signing of the start of the Revolutionary War. Right? So we look back on that year after year after year, and we celebrate war, that our country was founded in war. And that's sort of what the fireworks commemorate, the bursting of flames in the air. And the event itself is not a peaceful event either. I went there with a 2-year-old boy. I can tell you that is not a peaceful thing. Nor is it in the evening when I'm trying to get to sleep and people still want to keep celebrating and the popping keeps going. So it's a weekend that is antithetically opposed to peace. And so of course that's what I want to talk about is peace this Sunday. In the Gospel according to Matthew, as I read, Jesus says, as he's beginning with the Beatitudes, he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called sons of God." And that's an interesting comparison, I think. Sons of God, right? So that's a phrase, that's a term that's really, and the Christian tradition is only used to refer to one person, right? Jesus himself. So what he seems to be saying here is that if you are a peacemaker, if you seek to create peace in your community, then you're like him. Now that's an interesting prospect, I think. Sort of the counter to that, so the question that pops up after that is, well, then what does happen when peace is sought? For those who seek to follow Jesus. Well, all it takes is to look back over the past 2,000 years of Christendom and see that those who take these words to heart have not done a very good job at creating a peaceful world. And so why is that? Why has it been so hard to create peace? Right? Jesus came, he preached peace. Paul preached peace. Why has it been so hard to create peace in our communities, in our world? And I think when we get back to those questions of, where does the need for peace come from? We ask ourselves, where does war come from? Why is there a need for peace? Where do these conflicts arise? And I think that every single conflict ultimately boils down to somebody drawing a line in the sand and saying, beyond this you shall not pass, or else. When we explore questions of where aspects of our humanity come from, it's very difficult to find good answers, right? We can't go back in time and find the earliest humans. We can't ask questions of our ancestors. We can read some of their writings, perhaps, but we can't really know what's going through their heads. We can't see what they actually did. The next best thing that we can do when asking questions about who we are and what we are, it's just like when we try to place ourselves within the context of the stories that our families tell, right? So you compare yourself, your story, your experiences with those of your siblings, with those of your cousins and aunts and uncles. And you try to figure out where you fit into all this, where you get these traits from, right? So you have this passion for woodworking. Well, so does your uncle. Maybe there's something shared there. Well, it's just like with humanity. We have to look to our closest relatives in order to ask those questions. And there's a primatologist based out of Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. His name is Franz de Waal, and he has done a lot of study on our closest relatives, chimpanzees especially. And he's written a number of popular books that explore the commonalities between humans and our closest relatives in the primate clade. One of them being our inner-apers, an excellent one I would recommend. When you look at chimpanzee society, you do see profound violence spurting up. And you do see something manifesting which we would recognize as war. One of the things which happens frequently in chimpanzee society is that the troops exist with boundaries around them, right? So they have territories, and they sort of defend these territories. And every once in a while, a group of young males will get together and roam and cross their boundaries. They cross that line that they've divided themselves from the other troops, and they go into another troop's territory and find a vulnerable individual and lay upon that chimpanzee and tear it limb from limb, completely destroy it. Right, so this is something that we see in our closest relatives. This mirrors what we see in ourselves. We see the same tendency in ourselves. And it seems inevitable. And this may be why Jesus said later in the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 10, he says, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace but a sword." This is but one of many contradictory sayings according to Jesus that we read in the Gospels, of course. And one of the aspects of the gospel of doubt is being willing to question that, say maybe Jesus was wrong, maybe he's speaking to something, maybe he's contradicting himself. We need to ask why. We need to find out what exactly this means, right? One thing that I think this could mean is that maybe Jesus was aware, or maybe whoever was writing on behalf of Jesus was aware that his own name would be used to draw a line in the sand. And that people would say, do not cross over this name of Jesus that I've drawn here. And if you're on that side, you are of the other. And if you're on the side closest to me, then we are the same, and we will have peace. Throughout human history, we've been drawing these lines, even in recent memory. The conflicts that we've had in the 20th century have been about drawing lines in the sand. So this is the Korean War, which was fought over a literal line, a line drawn across the Korean Peninsula. Right? This is after World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union was dividing up the territories in Europe and also in Asia, and Korea had been largely conquered by the Japanese Empire, and now we were trying to figure out who's going to get what. And the Soviet Union took the north, and we took the south. And the governments that were set up there immediately started fighting because there's a line between them. There's a line between them. And if you were on the wrong side of this line, very bad things happen. Just like with the chimpanzee troops. So these were civilians that were slaughtered by North Vietnamese that felt that they were on the wrong side of the line. And when you see it up close, when you see this devastation up close, it can really affect you. But one of the things that has happened with our technology, our war-making technology, is we can get further away from that line. We don't have to be right up to it with drawn swords. We can be miles away from it, shooting shells from a ship in the middle of the ocean. We can be so far away from it that we can drop a bomb and destroy an entire city. And in the 21st century, as in the 20th century, the distance between the soldier and the line is no less effective. It causes no less havoc on that person's spiritual sense and their emotional well-being. And I want to share with you now a section of the Gospel of Doubt. This is the Gospel according to Steve. And Steve Mooney was a lieutenant in the United States Army, served in Afghanistan. Now out of the Army. He wrote about those experiences, is writing about those experiences for the Gospel of Doubt. And he talks about one instance where he had to cross that line. But this being the 21st century, he got to cross that digitally. And how that affected him. So this is the Gospel according to Steve. I once had a man killed who was armed only with a shovel. In this case, it was midnight, and he was burying something along a section of road where improvised and explosive devices had been detonated against our patrols. He was smoking a cigarette after finishing the burial when the bomb nearly missed him and exploded nearby. He had some natural cover in this valley, and it would have been a tricky shot. The infrared display went white, black, white with the sensor overload. Then hot objects appeared all over the place, and I didn't see anything recognizably human standing out on the thermal. I watched it all in clarity through a thermal camera and transmitting from a UAV orbiting unseen miles above. I saw his body the next day. The charred and shattered upper half was around 20 feet from the lower, still connected by the intestines. I consoled myself at the time with the notion that I couldn't figure anything else that he had been up to. That patrols had warned the locals that this kind of thing would happen. It looked like IEDs were being placed. I told myself that in the very likely event that he was planting an IED, the bomber would remotely trigger it from standoff range, out of danger, the same way we were striking him, though the technology was hugely different. We were soldiers, and if we could not kill people, we were not soldiers. So we coldly dropped a bomb on this man at near zero risk to our own guys. As to the charred, hacked corpse of the guy, I remember that they found several unexploded IEDs in that area later. But I don't know if we killed a Taliban fighter or an innocent man burying his dog in the wrong place at the wrong time. If better than 3/4 of folks in the military are Christian, chances are the Air Force guy piloting the UAV and pulling the trigger to drop that bomb was Christian. Like the guy who loaded that bomb was too, as was the guy who built it. But I was an atheist. Nevertheless, we all helped kill a man. Though if it had been the wrong guy, responsibility would be mine in this case. We killed a lot of people this way, and he was just one. So the effect of the line still exists even in the 21st century, even when we kill each other remotely via digital technology. In Korea, the war never ended, technically, although the war was never started, technically. It was a police action, a United Nations police action, that did not end with a peace treaty. It ended with an armistice. They put down their guns, but the line in the sand remains, and we stare across it still today. Our elected leaders and unelected leaders look at each other through binoculars while people take handy photographs for propaganda purposes. But military war is not the only war that we have to deal with. They're not the only kinds of lines drawn in the sand. We also have to deal with cultural wars. So this is not literally my grandmother, but this is my grandmother on both sides. Right? So during World War II, my grandmother tied a kerchief around her head, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work like Rosie the Riveter, building aircraft engines. She did that all through the war. And then when the war was over, she did what she was told. She put that away, got married, raised a family, and started cleaning houses instead of building engines. She did what was expected of her, which was what's been expected of women in this country for years and years and years. And she would have, I've never asked her about this personally, but I'm sure she would have rejected much of the feminist movement that was coming along at the time. I know my mother did and does. She is very much her mother's daughter. But there has been, nevertheless, a great upswell in feminism and a push for more equal rights for women in this country. And that has seen a lot of success. Right? And there has been a culture war. The lines are constantly drawn. The battles have been fought, sometimes won in the cause of equality, sometimes less so. Right? So we've just had a recent decision by the Supreme Court that seems to be a bit of a regress, if you will. And many of my friends who are feminists, many of the people that I know in the secular community, are sharpening their bayonets as we speak, getting ready to redraw the lines and go to battle again. And many in the conservative Christian community are doing the same thing. Excited about that. But I think that may be a little misplaced. I think the long-term view shows a trajectory in the direction of equality for women. And it's been in a way that I think, not every issue, of course, but in a way that a lot of people can agree on. And I have a friend, his name is John Ferrer, he's a Christian apologist, and he wrote a book, he gave a talk recently called Unwaging the War on Women. And he makes arguments in that talk that there's another side of feminism, the so-called maternal feminism. The kind of feminism that my mother might agree with and identify with. And in fact, I've had conversations with her over a glass of wine where she sort of vented a bit of her frustration at the path that she's taken and how restrictive it's been for her and how many things have been kept from her with the path that she chose, willingly. But John points out that there were also great strides made by merging these two interests, merging the egalitarian feminist view and the maternal feminist view. And I'll quote from his talk here. He talks about Frances Willard, who you see on the right, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who represented a more egalitarian view. And they had to work together. They all had to work together. They had to find common ground in order to pass the 19th Amendment, which was a huge progress, huge mark of progress. John says, both maternal feminism and egalitarian feminism, no matter the terminology, are actual perspectives of actual females proposing actual theories of how women are best empowered and best served, and how their equality should operate. It is unfortunate that the notions of feminism and women's liberation have come to be identified in the public eye as strictly radical and politically liberal. In this way, countless women who are genuine advocates for women's interests, gender equality, and female empowerment refuse to use the term feminist. In this way, the history of feminism bears out a richer and more complex history than is seen in much of the modern feminist discourse. It may turn out that egalitarian anthropology only addresses a narrow segment of women, while castigating countless more women who revel in maternal glory. And there's much in his talk that I disagree with, but I think he has a point here. There is a role for setting aside those differences and sort of ignoring the boundary and stepping together and achieving more in peace. So what then for peace? Right? So we were faced with this legacy of military conflict and violence. We're also faced with a legacy of cultural conflict and cultural wars. What then for peace? Well, according to Steven Pinker, we are actually getting more peaceful as a society, as a global society. In a recent book he wrote called The Better Angels of Our Nature, he argues that when compared with the history of humanity, and given the increasing population in modern times, that our violence is a tiny fraction of our actual human experience now compared to back then. That things are actually getting better and more peaceful. And he cites several reasons for this. Number one, we're making more rational decisions. All of us are. Whether we're religious or not, when it comes to practical decisions about how to live our lives and how to engage with other countries, we're doing this rationally. We place more importance and emphasis on self-control and developing our moral sensibilities. Right? Not just whatever the priest happens to say, but people are starting to think more about what's right and wrong. People like Steve in the Gospel according to Steve, even as he's calling for these bombs to be dropped, he's questioning what the army is ordering him to do. But I think the most important aspect that Pinker mentions, really the foundation of all of this, is really our sense of empathy. Our ability to recognize in each other the same emotional states that we have, the same needs and values that we have, and identify with each other. Getting back to Franz de Waal, one of the other species that he studies quite in depth is the bonobo. Right? So if you're not familiar with the bonobo, there's actually two different species of chimpanzee. There's the greater chimpanzee, which we're most familiar with, Pan troglodytes, but there's another one called the bonobo, or Pan paniscus, which is a little bit different. It's actually a separate species, and it has a widely different social life than the chimpanzees that most of us know about. Right? So the bonobo is much more peaceful than the regular chimpanzees. And as Ed mentioned about kissing, and this being the International Day of Kissing, the bonobo chimpanzee is much more affectionate and much more connected with the others in its troop, physically and even sexually. Right? So this is actual normal social discourse within bonobos. This is pretty much how they say hello. This is also how they achieve peace. Right? So whenever conflict comes up within bonobo troops, essentially what is organized is a group orgy, typically by the females, the highest ranked females. They say, all right, everybody stop. We're all going to have a little fun here. And then at the end of that process, everybody's forgotten about the problem. So that's how the bonobos achieve peace. I'm not suggesting that this is something that we should follow necessarily. Your mileage may vary. we see, again, just like with the other chimpanzees, we see this war and this violence. We also see this capacity for love and connection, empathy, and real connection with some of our other closer relatives. So I think we have this capacity within us to achieve empathy, and through that, break down these barriers. And in fact, that's what the Apostle Paul says about Jesus in his letter to the Ephesians. He says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility." So that's why being a peacemaker is being like Jesus, because Jesus breaks down, or is said to break down these barriers, right? And again, this is the gospel of doubt, so we can raise these questions. Does Jesus actually break down these barriers? In my experience, no. In my experience, no. It can, but in practice, I think it doesn't. And the reason is because Jesus himself can be used as a barrier. So I say, let's wipe that from the sand. And not just Jesus, but any other thing that can be used to divide us, any other ideology. Wipe those away, right? So be the one who stands up and says, no, we're not going to let you bully us, right? But you're also not saying, if you try to bully us, we're going to beat you up. No, we're going to try to erase the differences between us, make us all the same, find the commonality. We can all count, right? And there's always going to be those who want to draw lines in the sand. But when we respond in anger, what we have done is we have accepted the line. We've accepted the line that they have drawn. We have agreed with them that yes, this is the line that has to be fought over. And we will fight over it, and we will tear you limb from limb in the process. So let us seek instead to be peacemakers. Do not acknowledge the line that's drawn in front of you on any issue. Don't acknowledge it. Challenge the person. Be the one. Challenge the person that's on the other side as well as yourself to wipe the line away and find common ground. And then perhaps we can all use the sand for a better purpose. Thank you. And now let us rise in body or spirit and join in singing our closing hymn, number 148, Let Freedom Stand Both East